Welcome, everyone. I'm Brian Caldwell, and we're back with another episode of our 5x5 podcast with CompStak. Today's guest is Adam Collins. He comes to us from Transwestern in Washington, D.C., and he's an industrial and office broker in the market. Welcome, Adam. How are you?
Hey, Brian. Always good to see you, and I'm better now that we're together.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule for us.
Of course.
We're going to take a look at our pulse check, which we do every podcast episode, where we dive into what CompStak is seeing in the DC market data. Starting with DOGE, according to CompStak's analysis of DOGE website data, a staggering 1/3 or 33% of all DOGE-related federal lease terminations nationwide by square footage were concentrated in the DC market. The second largest state market following DC is California at just 6%. In terms of rent performance and recovery, according to our CompStak Gateway Office Market Recovery Rankings from mid-2025, DC ranks 9th out of 10 major markets for rent recovery since 2019, classified as lagging in both Class A and B and C space, showing declining effective rents. In terms of concessions, CompStak data reveals downtown DC tenants now receive free rent for 16% of their lease term as of 2025. That's the highest share among all gateway markets, tracking up dramatically from previous years. And we're going to circle back to these facts and discuss them with Adam here shortly. But before we do that, let's learn a little bit about what Adam is seeing in the market. So, Adam, if you can tell us about the DC market, starting with any tailwinds and any headwinds that you're seeing kind of driving trends there.
Yeah, well, you mentioned it right off the top with DOGE, and that's obviously been a huge player in our market. But it starts with not necessarily just DOGE, but it's, unstable funding for a lot of the office tenants here. And so that's a major headwind. We've experienced that since the beginning of the year with the new administration in DOGE. They've obviously changed their funding priorities. And also, a lot of our tenants here in Washington are those nonprofit organizations, those government contractors, which rely heavily on government organizations like USAID or the Department of Education, which have both been shuttered, and drastic budget cuts from all parts of the government, with the exception of the Department of Defense. And so that leads to lower aggregate office demand, as tenants are having more uncertainty with their own funding. And then obviously in conjunction with the headwinds that we saw during COVID. Another, negative about our market is, we're just getting out of the government shutdown, which was the longest in history. Massive layoffs across the federal government, National Guard, ICE, lowering our tourism and our general economic uncertainty in the DC market. So we do have, some significant, economic headwinds heading towards us, and kind of been pounding the DC market. I don't know how I'm gonna hold on, pause there.
Yeah.
So we do have some, obviously some general economic headwinds, not only in the private sector, but the federal sector, and then obviously just personally with all of the layoffs. The tailwinds, some of the positives in our market is, we are still a resilient market where we are seeing the need for a lot of these technology companies and AI companies to be near the seat of power, as we are, as a country, trying to understand our AI regulation. We're seeing more and more organizations come into our market and expand their presence, especially in that AI and data technology sector. Obviously, out in Northern Virginia is Data Center Alley. Groups like Amazon are spending record amounts of money on tracts of land, which they can build data centers. As one of the strongest in the country, we have about 80% of the data centers in the U.S. are located in Northern Virginia. So those are, some of the positives in our market. We still obviously have a huge, it's still a great space for technology.
It's interesting you mentioned data centers. We had Ryan Atkinson on our podcast from JLL, San Francisco, and he's a data center broker. And we touched on the concentration of availability of power in the DMV area, that it was the highest in there. I think they have 8 regions that they define, and the Mid-Atlantic and Central Virginia DMV area is the highest in terms of data center capacity. So, yeah, that should be an interesting trend to watch. And on that note, why don't you kind of give us your outlook, maybe short term over the next year, and then a longer term beyond that, if you can. I know things are kind of up in the air, and there's a lot of uncertainty nowadays. But what are you feeling and seeing?
Yeah, so I think the national office markets will continue to rebound slightly as the lending environment gets more friendly, as we see interest rates may potentially drop. We've seen lenders are getting more open to refinancing and financing new acquisition for office space. And those new buyers now have a lower basis, which means that they can get more tenant-friendly deals done. So I think that we'll see a more active office market across the country in the next, 12 to 24 months. I don't know how much that will impact us here locally in DC. I still think that there is uncertainty in our market and will continue to be. I would say locally here, finding the best available space will become harder, more difficult, and more expensive as is all of our demand locally is concentrated in those white shoe law firms, the trophy quality space. That's got a great demand for it. Unfortunately, there's not really much of that space being built in DC. And so once that all gets leased over the next 24 months, it will be a challenge for tenants that want to be in the best quality space to find that space, and whether or not they would be willing to accept Class A minus or Class A space instead of that trophy space. Will be interesting to see what their decisions are. Will they still find as much need in the office if they can't get all of the amenities and the location, the views, and all the benefits of having a trophy office? Um, so that'll be interesting to see is how the demand responds to a very limited supply of trophy quality properties here in DC.
Gotcha. So what I'm hearing is the tenants that are willing to make a decision in the next 12 months or so are going to have their pick of the quality, prime A space. And once that's gone, things are going to get a lot more challenging and expensive for those who were kind of deferring decisions until, their comfort level was appropriate. Gotcha. Okay.
Absolutely.
Great. And then, a lot of things were pretty surprising, I would say, at least from a non Washingtonian perspective that I have here in Atlanta. But kind of looking back over the last year, what has shifted most unexpectedly that you just, didn't see coming or wasn't forecast?
Yeah, I mean it's the return a little bit of the capital markets from new acquisitions, and I don't know that it's necessarily a huge surprise. But what has been interesting to see is who are the new players in Washington D.C. Who is going out and being aggressive about acquiring these new office properties, as I think it sets the table for who's going to be the most active owners over the next 10 years. And so I think we're reshaping who the major landlords are across town right now, and it's just been interesting to see who's been aggressive, who's been active. Um, I thought it would be more of the large scale REITs that have a lot of cash to come in and buy up these properties at low basis. I think that we've seen kind of a smattering of folks who have been interested in investing here locally in DC, which will change the tides a little bit in terms of who's running the show.
Hmm. Interesting viewpoint there. Okay. Great. Circling back to a little bit more conversation on our pulse check. We talked about DOGE, which you provided a little bit more context into why it's not just the government leases, but kind of the other adjacent impacts of nonprofit and contractors and folks that are associated with the government. Taking a look at concessions. So we mentioned that DC tenants are now giving up 16% DC tenants are now receiving 16% of their lease term in free rent. Talk to us a little bit about what's been driving that, and then maybe some changes that you're seeing on the horizon here.
Yeah, I mean, I think DC is definitely one of the markets where it's long been a tenant-friendly market since about 10 years, especially over the last 10, 12 years. Been a very tenant-friendly market. And rent abatement has typically been about, 1 month per year of the deal, like you'll see in most markets across the country. Especially during COVID, though, we raised to, on a 14-year deal or 12-year deal, sorry, during the height of the pandemic in 21 or so, maybe 22, we were able to get, 30 months of rent abatement. So 2.5 years of free rent on a 12-year deal, which is more than you'll see in any other market across the country, as far as, and I've done deals across the country. That has certainly been changing as landlords are now coming up with or coming up against loan maturities, and so the landlords are wanting to recoup their money a little bit faster. We're seeing lower concessions than we did during COVID, as landlords are trying to recoup their investment of the transaction cost before their loan terms come due. I've had multiple owners from large ownerships tell me that this is their plan, that any sort of investment that they make into a particular deal has got to have a shorter time horizon for break even point than previously, because candidly, they don't know if in 3 to 5 years they will own this property. And so we're seeing owners look more short term than they previously did. So if you give 3 years of free rent on a deal, and you don't own the property in 3.5 years, you haven't done a whole lot. And it's not as though you had sold the property; it's you lost the property. And so that also does not bring a lot of value to doing the deal. So that's why it makes it difficult to get some of these deals done. Is to you have to really understand the capital structure behind each building.
Sure. And how has that impacted how you advise your tenants that you're working with looking for space, kind of with this new landscape of pressure on the landlord and things that they were able to do a few years ago that they're not able to do now?
Yeah, it's become a conversation. And when, I'll give you an example of a deal we were negotiating where the landlord had agreed to build in some new amenities for my client, or for the new building amenities in general, a new conference facility, upgraded fitness facility, and a renovated roof. And when push came to shove, and we tried to get those promises in the lease, we were able to uncover that those plans weren't as firm as we had hoped. And so, and it turns out that the lender actually was about to take back the building. The landlord uh, could not actually perform on the lease.
Mm.
And so it's become one of those topics where you have to ask the question, you have to ask probing questions. When is the loan due? How much is due? And you take a look at the building itself. And in our market is relatively small, so we share information amongst brokers in terms of who's able to perform, who's not. And then when you start to ask those questions and start to get those guarantees put into the lease, you're able to really sniff out if the landlord's able to perform or not.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
but you certainly don't want to get into a position where you're asking a landlord to do a full build out and you don't know for a fact if they can perform that full build out. Because that can cost you a lot of time and money. If you sign a lease and the landlord is not able to build out your space, and 12 months has gone by, and now you don't have a space built out, and your lease is expiring. So we want to be cognizant of that as brokers.
Sure. Great. Let's segue to office to residential conversions, if you will. I know I was taking a look at CBRE data, and there's a significant number of, I think, 32 projects planned after 2027 by their analysis of office to residential conversions. you mentioned that you've seen that activity in the market just down the street from you. So why don't you talk to us about that and how that's impacting your market?
Yeah, this I think is actually pivotal. As difficult as it is to pull off a conversion. You obviously have to be able to buy it at the right price. The existing conditions have to be a certain way. And obviously there's the physical issues with the building in terms of ceiling height and the window well, and then also the geography of the building. Where is it located? Are there any neighborhood amenities? And then so there, it's becoming it is challenging, but I will commend the DC mayor who has really worked hard at providing some incentives to get landlords and new buyers, new developers to convert these properties. Um, and that's really what it's going to take because like in many markets, DC has a demand for office problem. You're right, the demand is not as high, but also we do have a supply. We have an oversupply of office product, and some folks would say that we just have we have an under demolished office market, right? And
Mm.
so we have a lot of buildings that just aren't ever going to be viable. If we're talking about the Class A and trophy markets, really just the trophy markets are doing very well. Even Class A and B plus is certainly struggling. So these are, functionally obsolete buildings that need to be converted and to be, because, we see it in the tax revenue for the District of Columbia is down because the real estate taxes are down. So the conversions are going to be something that I think that is the only way to really rebalance our market to get it back to equilibrium, and also provide folks with a good place to live. I think that we have a lot of really prime real estate. You look at a lot of the federal government buildings down near the National Mall and on Pennsylvania Avenue that are being utilized as low as, if you believe what this administration has said, as low as 2%, 3% of the building might be occupied. Yet it costs the American taxpayers millions of dollars to renovate or to keep up with these buildings. Um, so those are going to be an interesting um, those will be interesting projects to understand what happens. There's, five, six, seven federally leased buildings that are not being utilized down in the National Mall, which will it's probably some of the most coveted real estate in the country, candidly. So that'll be something that I think we continue to work on over the next 5, 10 years. Really, is to understand what that looks like. But I would expect the federal government um, will sell those to private developers at some point, and that will be conversions to multifamily, mixed use, residential, and hospitality, retail, all that.
Sure. You might think it makes sense given that the current administration, their background in real estate development and whatnot, that they would be pretty keen on capitalizing on that. But I guess we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, yeah. I think it'll be a long process. Likely, I know they started it earlier this year, and they pulled back, and I expect them at some point in time to begin that process and to figure out how to change hands for some of these buildings.
Sure. Great. Let's talk a little bit about kind of just your path in commercial real estate here. So, you and I have known each other for probably 5 years now through SAOR and other conferences and things. Your background has been in office, tenant rep brokerage. You recently kind of transitioned over to industrial. And I think in a previous conversation with me, you and I were talking about your kind of mindset of follow the puck. So why don't you talk a little bit about, that transition for you? What does follow the puck mean to you, and how is that kind of manifesting itself in your day-to-day work now?
Yeah, I had a mentor who's the CEO of a large hotel REIT, a large hospitality REIT. Give me some advice and just about, we were talking about the real estate market here locally in DC, and understanding that, I'm in my that I've been doing this for about 10 years, but I still have a long career ahead of me. And so to find the clients and the users that need to use the space for their business, that it's, critical to their business. Some would say it's mission critical, right, to their business to have a piece of real estate, and helping them maximize that piece of real estate is what I'm focused on now. And so that's led me to a more of an industrial track, right? If you think about a distribution center, a 3PL, or manufacturing warehouse, even as I've done sports facilities and all sorts of industrial users, that they need that to be their business, right? And so the velocity here in our market is much faster, much higher than an office, where there's still hesitation on the exact need for the office, how much space they need, is it germane to their culture? These questions are still being asked by executives across the country, and they're valuable questions to ask. And so, just for at this point in the market, I wanted to just shift focus a little bit onto, candidly moving past those questions on whether or not they need the piece of real estate, and just talk about how does this piece of real estate help you grow your business. And so those are the types of clients that I work with today.
Sure. And then talk to me about the SIOR network, if you will. I know it's a network of high achieving brokers across the country. You guys do deals with each other, refer deals to each other. How has that network helped during your transition from office into industrial?
I mean, the network has been invaluable. I joined SIOR about 6 years ago or so, and to be able to speak with not only brokers but developers from across the world, who are in different markets, but they all have a unique point of view, and to kind of collectively put that all together, right? You were able to get a really good understanding and a really good picture of the real estate market, which only helps you and your clients succeed and understand where the trends are going, and understand, how to make more money, and understand, how to better protect your clients. And so that's been super helpful. And to be able to see, just for me personally, that there are really productive brokers who do it, who operate their business in a completely different way than the way I operate my business, and a completely different way from the way that they operate their business. And so, each person operates their business a completely different way. And so you just see that there are ways to make money in this business, and you don't have to be a jerk about it. You don't have to you don't have to focus in one thing. You don't have to focus on the other. I've seen brokers from across the world have great careers, and they all have done it in their own way. And so that really gives you the confidence, or gives me the confidence as a younger broker. When I was a younger broker, I'm still felt fairly young, to go about this thing in my own way. And I know that I've got the support of these guys and gals across the world, that I can pick up the phone and call and ask them if I have questions. And also gives me the opportunity to share what I know, and how I've done things over here. And so sometimes you need that mouth, that voice, right?
Yep. Gotcha. Great. Yeah. Sounds invaluable for you. And lastly, before we jump off, I was just curious if there's any deals that you've signed recently that were interesting story, or maybe a complicated path, or just compelling to our audience, that you'd love to share with us.
Yeah, I just wrapped up a deal yesterday. We just got it signed. We negotiated the lease agreement, the lease document, for 12 months. And we obviously have been working with the client for about that's 6 months before that. So it's been a long process. Government funding um, was a part of it at one point, and which is why it took so long. But this will be an entertainment space, a venue for a local nonprofit, but more importantly, it will be an activation for this landlord who is trying to activate a new submarket in Washington, D.C., or, growing submarket in D.C. and their buildings and tries to get people into their space. And so we were able to negotiate a really awesome deal that is, significantly below market, yet still keeping concessions high. And that was just about finding the opportunity. That was about matchmaking, right? A developer delivering a new building that needed to have an arts related tenant. I had an arts related client that needed to have a space at below market rent, and we were able to marry them together, and get it executed yesterday, actually.
Nice. Congratulations. It's a nice pre-Thanksgiving win you got there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great.
It's a long time coming.
Awesome. Thanks for being with us today. Enjoyed your insights and conversation as always, and I look forward to seeing you on the conference trail here sometime soon.
We'll see you soon, Brian.
Definitely. You take care.